already accepted the partial amendment submission as amended. So that closes the Dunshaughlin chapter. Well done, everybody. So we move on now to the Bettystown, Laytown, Mornington, East, Donnacarney, and Mornington. So if we go to Sean for an overview, please. And thank you.
Thanks, Cahirlock. Cahirlock, we might start as usual with Alan giving the summary of the settlement, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Cahirlock. I'll just give a broad overview in relation to this settlement. As you can see on the screen there, it covers a substantial area, so I'll be as brief as I can. Just in relation to the population of East Meath in 2016 was 11,872. The projected population for the planned period is set to increase by 1,500 by 2027 to 13,372. The core strategy household allocation as outlined in the draft plan is for 746 units, which includes 518 extant units. In terms of the A2 residential zoning, there are 4 significant zoned A2 residential land banks. I'll just highlight some of them here now. They are located mainly around Bettystown, which includes the town centre zoned lands. So regarding the residential zoned lands, there's a large zoning here just to the west of the town centre zoned lands. In addition to that, there's a number of parcels up to the north of Bettystown as well. In addition to that, there is residential zoning, A2 zoning towards the centre of Donnacarney also. There is a C1 zoning just to the south of the town centre lands, which will also cater for a significant residential development within them. Within the B1 town centre zoned lands, it is recognised by the written statement that there is significant vacancy issues within the existing town centre there, and it is a priority for the draft plan as outlined in policies and objectives to develop this area. So again, there is opportunity for residential development on the B1 zoned lands. Up to 30% residential can be on B1 town centre zoned lands. Just in relation to open space, as you can see, there is a significant area identified there adjoining the town centre lands, which are zoned F1 open space. They are identified to cater for local sporting facilities. So they are identified just adjacent to the west of the town centre lands. In relation to employment, there is a new strategic employment site proposed to be zoned here adjacent to the west of the rail station in Laytown. You may also see the STAR objective there as well, or the SPOT objective, sorry, in relation to facilitating a park and ride facility adjacent to the rail station. In addition to that, there is another SPOT objective at Bettystown, which I'm just highlighting here as well, which is to facilitate the provision of a train station at Bettystown in addition to the existing train station at Laytown. And this is part of the DART expansion works to Drogheda. Other significant infrastructure works include the north-south spine road, which I believe is just under construction. That goes from the town centre zoned lands in the area I'm highlighting there on down towards Laytown. So that's another significant infrastructure project which will relieve traffic congestion in the centre of Bettystown there and increase accessibility to the town centre and indeed open up the C1 town centre zoned lands and provide greater access to the F1 open space zoning and the G1 community infrastructure zoning as well, which I've highlighted there. Just in relation to the development strategy, it is a priority for the settlements. If I zoom out there, you can see the settlements are quite close together. It is a priority of the development strategy that these settlements do not join together. That is a key recommendation coming out of the RSES and NPF, not to allow settlements to join together. So the importance of the visual breaks you can see between the likes of Donnacarney and South Drogheda, between Mornington and Bettystown, and also down to the south between Julianstown and Laytown, are of significant importance to retain the visual breaks between the settlements. Otherwise, you would have a continuous settlement the whole way along the coast there, going all the way around to South Drogheda. I'll briefly just outline some of the main changes which have come out of the submissions and notice of motions. One of them is there is a proposed rezoning of tourism uses to the north of Mornington there. We will come to them in the notice of motion, so I won't go into any further detail on them. In addition to that, there is a proposed rezoning in Donnacarney. These lands here were zoned A2. They are substantially complete, however, so they have been rezoned A1, and the A2 zoning has moved on to this parcel of land here in the centre of Donnacarney, which is identified for housing and community facilities also. So I think that's just some of the main points in relation to the East Meath settlement of Laytown, Bettystown, Mornington and Donnacarney. As stated, there was 37 public submissions received, with 7 of them resulting in changes recommended and 2 part changes recommended. I'll hand you back to the Cathaoirleach. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. We might just go to Sean just to get a visual of the notice of motions and submissions, just the quantities, so we can get an idea where we're travelling through.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. My legs won't stretch to kick Alan, so I'm going to ask him to stop sharing there. Just call up the submissions then on Laytown, Bettystown.
Cathaoirleach, before we go to that, could I come in and ask Alan a question, please?
Sorry, we're just looking at that. Yeah, we're going to come back to with the maps in 1 second, Councillor.
Okay.
You can ask away, Councillor Tolan. So
yeah, thanks a million, Alan. Just in relation to the coalescence of the settlements, you know, you're talking about an actual physical break between Mornington and Bettystown and Donnacarney and Laytown, and yet the 4 areas are seen as one settlement, as the East Meath settlement. So can I just get a view from planning as to whether or not we are one settlement of East Meath, or you envisage us being split into 4 settlements? Because we kind of contradict each other all of the time when we're dealing with East Meath in relation to whether or not we're 4 individual settlements or one actual settlement. I mean, we're talked about being the 3rd largest town in the county, and yet you're now talking about no coalescence and areas that the settlements not joining up, and yet we are one settlement. Can I just have maybe an answer on that? Thanks.
Alan?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, Padraig here. I'll come in and very briefly answer that. Alan's absolutely correct. It is not one settlement. It is 4 settlements that are under one local area plan called East Meath. Traditionally, that is the way it has always been dealt with in Meath. So I can state that it's not one settlement. It is not, and will be very much resisted at national, regional, local level, the coalescence of these. And there is an objective specifically within the NPF that states coalescence of settlements will not be permitted. So it would be against national, regional and local policy. The point here being that it operates under one local area plan. There are 4 settlements, and the idea of continuing with a compact urban form for each individual settlement itself will be significantly important, which is the same as all settlements throughout the country. And I think we've all heard enough about urban sprawl over recent years, and that's essentially what we're trying to avoid here. Thank you.
100%.
Come back on that, Councillor.
Can I? Yeah, 100%. I agree with you there, Padraig, except according to the CSO, we are counted as one settlement. We're not allowed to individually apply for town and village renewal. Our population is counted as one settlement in East Meath: Laytown, Bettystown, Mornington and Donnacarney.
Thank you, Councillor. Just want to come back in on that, Padraig, before we move to Councillor McKee.
Well, I don't think that's an issue for planning. That's an issue of how information is gathered by external agencies. So yes, I do agree it's not ideal, and we do obviously rely heavily on census data. However, for the purposes of planning, we are restricted to breaking it down into the 4 settlements and how they are to be planned for into the future and over the 6-year plan period. So that's all I can say on that. Thank you.
Thanks a million.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Stephen McKee.
Thanks, Chair. Just like to ask a question in relation to the spot objective, the train station in Bettystown.
Again, Councillor, we're specific to the overview of the map that was discussed. There was no mention of specific objectives.
There is. Well, it's a spot objective. It's a spot objective that's on the map that Alan referred to. Just in relation to that spot objective, the train station in Bettystown that Alan referred to. Look, I'm fully supportive of a train station in the area, and in fact, there's probably good argument that it could be 2, given the DART expansion in the area. I'd just like to know, I put down a motion for the provision of a spot objective at Cope for a train station, and I was told it was essentially thrown out pending the adoption of the transport study area. So I'd just like to know, as I said, I think there is room there possibly for a train station at Cope and possibly another one at Bettystown, but I'd just like to know why the spot objective has been included when I had requested a spot objective just up the train line there at Cope, and that was effectively thrown out pending the transportation study. So I'd just like to know why that spot objective has been included and not the one that I proposed.
Why not the 2? Sorry, okay, Councillor, we get the point.
Why haven't the 2 of them been included?
Again, if it is subject to a notice of motion, we can discuss it at length. If it's not subject to a notice of motion, then we're not really in a position to discuss it at any great length. So this will be as a special favour to you that we spend any time speaking about this at all. So,
oh, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Padraig?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The objective to have a train station in this plan, it goes back in number of development plans and is supported, being investigated and looked at feasibly by the Irish Rail. The objective at Culp was a new objective, and we obviously have a transportation study ongoing within the Drogheda area that's investigating that now as a new objective, and we could not include the spot objective at Culp because it was the first time it was considered, and particularly given that a transportation study is underway to inform the joint urban plan at Drogheda, it was considered inappropriate at this time to include a new objective as opposed to a long-standing objective which exists there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Padraig.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Paddy Meath.
Thank you, Cahirla, and thank you, planning, for such a wonderful presentation. And I think the overview of this area is so good, and there's so many beneficial things in it, be it the green spaces or the train stations, that it probably limited the amount of motions that were put in, because a lot of what we want is already there, and that is to be welcomed. So to see the delivery of these will be the key thing. I suppose the identity of Laytown and Bettystown, Mornington, I have cousins that live in Mornington and one in Laytown, and they're very much see themselves as different identities. But from a planning perspective, we should
note that Mornington runs up to the Neptune Hotel. That's where the townland of Mornington goes, and anyone who is seeking planning permission and doesn't put it on their planning application that they're in Mornington, Laytown, Bettystown golf course, as you may know, is in Mornington. So where you have even chosen to put Mornington on your map is probably up near the church or the pub, but actual Mornington runs to the Neptune Hotel, and that's where Mornington runs. And people, I know, and I blame two auctioneers in particular who sold housing estates in that area and labelled them as Bettystown when they are in fact in Mornington. And then of course the golf course confuses people to call Laytown Bettystown when it is in Mornington. But we should be clear. I believe in planning, and I great interest in maps. Mornington runs to the Neptune Hotel, so it is all one already. Mornington is very much populated by the settlement of Bettystown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I suppose, Padraig, if you want to come back in here, and I don't think it's much, we spend much time talking about how auctioneers would label their houses. That's entirely up to themselves as well, I suppose. So, Padraig, if you just want to respond.
Sorry, no comment.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go straight to the notice of motions now. Notice 133, submitted by Councillor Keoghan. So Councillor Smith is going to speak on that. We just need a seconder on this motion, please. We have a seconder on the motion, please.
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillor Behan. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thanks, Councillor Behan, for seconding the motion. I'm asking that this particular site, be zoned back to its original zoning, which was residential development. This site has a long history of zoning, and it forms part of an overall site that was granted planning permission in 2008 by Onboard Planala. Both the East Meath area plan in 2005 and prior plan zoned these lands for residential use. The proposals for the overall site were originally conceived as part of a wider development for the estate there. I think it's called the Maiden Hayes. The intention was to deliver the overall site in phases where planning was granted, on the basis that phases 3 and 4 would be postponed until infrastructures were in place. These infrastructures are now developed, and the site is fully serviced and ready to deliver much needed housing immediately. This site would complete the development of the existing estate at the Maiden, sorry, I keep forgetting the name, Maiden Hayes. And it could also deliver a public amenity. The lands are not suitable for agricultural use, as they're landlocked between that residential estate there and other lands. You know, over the years, development along the coast, you know, it grew significantly without any public amenity spaces. There's an opportunity here to include a proposal as part of a development that could happen here. The site is located, it's in a good location. There's a huge demand for houses there. It's not on near any flood risk. So I'm asking for it to be given back its zoning of residential use, and I'd ask the member to support it, please. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Councillor. We get a response from the Chief Executive.
Chairman.
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I think I have a conflict of interest here. I think my company might have dealt with this said landowner before.
Do you just, in order to declare the conflict, you'll need to declare the nature of the conflict.
Yeah, my company dealt with this person before.
The owner of the land.
Yes.
So you need to. I'm advised that you need to name that. There's the developer, the owner.
That's what I'm trying to establish. Whose land is this? I'm not sure it was the right land or not.
So what land are you conflicted with? I suppose that's the. It's like
there was land around Maiden Hayes that I did do. My company done work for. Salt and pivotal developments.
Here, look, it's our belief that yes, this is the same parcel of land that Councillor Tormey thinks.
So we just just for the record, we like for the minutes we need a little bit more just detail from. So who owns the land?
Yeah, but it is then. It's Michael Ryan's land, is it?
So Michael. Okay. So and on that.
Yeah, but we're not on the developers. In fairness, it's the land was on.
Yeah, but again, it's any relationship with any benefit that may accrue from the zoning or to anybody who may be connected with any councillor. So the idea will be if there's any connection between a professional relationship or a private relationship that may be deemed beneficial to the member, should be declared, and the member should remove themselves from the discussion from the meeting.
That's what I'm doing.
So once we've established. once you've established that there is a connection now, absolutely, and well done for doing that, Councillor.
Yeah, well, it's a past connection, but I don't know what's going forward with the company first, but it's a past connection, so that's what I'm declaring.
So there's not an active connection?
No.
Well, if Councillor Thornley perceives that there's a potential conflict of interest, he should take himself out of it.
Okay, so the responsibility lies with the member if it's perceived that if they believe that there may be a conflict or a perceived conflict, then that lies within the
Yeah, well, I believe there is a conflict because I dealt with him before. So.
Okay, so if that's okay, we'll ask you to move to the waiting room, and then we'll let you know when you come back in.
You move me, is it?
Yeah, they'll move you now in a second.
Right.
Jackie.
Thanks, Cahirlock. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, I suppose just to confirm, there is a submission 376 relating to said lands. Am I right, Alan and Sean, that the motion 133 by Councillor Keoghan refers to a submission 376?
That's correct, yes.
Might just assist members in trying to identify as well the land in question, but I think that already has been done. Thank you, Cahirlock.
Again, with reference to notice of motion 376, which is relating to this parcel of land that we're going to discuss, at a submission, so there's a submission 376, there's a notice of motion 133, the named submitted by a named developer or owner of the land. If people familiarise themselves with that name and see if there's any conflict, if they could indicate that conflict before we go any further, that then will remove any subsequent conflict that you may feel you may have wished to declare at a later date. So the motion is submitted by Future Analytics on behalf of Michael Ryan.
Cahirlock.
Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, I would have to remove myself from this as well. I wasn't aware of the land until you've mentioned it there now.
Okay. So it is necessary then for you to declare the nature of your conflict, Councillor?
My office is leased from the land owner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. So again, like Councillor Tormey, be in the waiting room. Okay, so we've had time to digest that piece of information with regards to anybody's responsibility of a perceived or a conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest. We'll now proceed with Councillor Toole.
Just a quick query, Cahirlock. If a landowner or a developer sponsors, for example, a raffle or otherwise to a substantial amount over the threshold for which we make declarations, is that applicable in this instance as well?
Well, the onus is, of course, at all times that the members participating in the meeting are aware of any potential conflict that may lie with them. It is entirely the responsibility of the member to declare that, and it's not the responsibility of the meeting to to highlight the conflict of the members. So the obligation is entirely on the member in this regard, and on that member alone. So if people feel, and again it is with regards to if the member feels that they themselves are conflicted, or if whether actually or there's a perceptual possibility, then it's in the responsibility of the member themselves to identify that. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Partly, if I may come back, may I come back in?
Okay, and maybe what we'll use this is a small opportunity to discuss the nature of conflicts for subsequent discussions, and we ask as many questions as you want on this issue with the indulgence of Councillor Smith, because it is her motion. But if we do that now, and maybe we get a little bit of feedback from the CE on this, and then we can put this to bed, and then it's up to ourselves then to declare any subsequent conflicts of any parcel of land that we move into. So.
Okay, well then thank you most sincerely, Cahirlock, and also to Councillor Smith. Every day is a school day, so I think then it is right. So I was formerly a member of a political party that would run an annual draw and there would have been a substantial amount of money spent on purchasing raffle tickets for same fundraising, which would be used to fund election campaigns, etc. So is that relevant in this instance or not? And thank you.
So any questions with regards to this will be going straight to Rory. Maybe Rory might give us on that initial question and any subsequent question that might arise from that.
That's a difficult one, Cathaoirleach. As Robert pointed out earlier, at the end of the day, it is a call for the individual councillors. But as I previously mentioned, there's two categories of conflict. There's actual conflict and there's perceived conflict, because things have to be perceived to be dealt with objectively. And the issue for the councillor is whether that association of a former political party with the landowner or developer's case to be in question is such as may influence her ultimate decision on the matter before the members. The fact that it was a former political party as distinct from her current one, it is a relevant and pertinent issue. But as Robert had said, at the end of the day, the call is for the individual councillor. It's a past association, it's not a present association, but the call is for the individual councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. Does that answer any questions that other members may have? Does that answer your question, Councillor Toole?
It does, Councillor, and Cathaoirleach, I should say, and thank you very much to Mr. McEntee for his contribution. It wouldn't be relevant in my particular case because I resigned before the 2019 local election, but I believe it could be relevant to others.
Again, Councillor, it's not for us. It's not for us to decide if there's a conflict.
No, I understand, and thank you for letting me back in.
Okay, thank you very much. So, with all said and done with regards to that discussion, it is important, obviously, and it's highlighted again that members are familiar with submissions that may be in their book of submissions that may be are coming up in the next number of days, weeks, months, with regards to that they're familiarise themselves with the content and any of the land designations, just to avoid anything after the event that may not have been in your kind of area of knowledge while we're dealing with it, particularly when we're dealing with the submissions on block, and that's something that's again, it lies entirely within the responsibility of the member. So with that said, we will continue with our discussion on notice of motion 113. 133. So we will go back to Councillor Smith. I don't think anybody else has it. Councillor Smith? We have a okay, so with that slight that slight distraction there, so we go back to the Chief Executive's recommendation. If we could just have the Chief Executive's response, please.
Okay, look, I think we wanted to bring Rory McEntee just in on this matter before we come in ourselves on it, just to say, explain the history behind this site. Thank you.
Okay, Rory.
Yes, now I know what the site is when the clarifications came as to the landowner is. The as Councillor Smith pointed out, there was a previous zoning, but that was changed by way of material alteration on the Donnacarney Eastmeath LAP, and that was challenged in the High Court by the developer. And there was a very lengthy High Court hearing over a long number of days, and the judgment of the court was very much in favour of Meath County Council, that they had acted properly throughout the process, and that it was the function of Meath County Council to allocate scarce resources, as it were, within the settlement, because the settlement only had the potential for X number of units, and it was a matter for the council applying proper planning standards, etc., to decide who got the benefit of those units. So at the end of the day, the High Court were fully supportive of the actions taken by Meath County Council at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. Sean, if you come in on that, or Patrick.
Yep, so that's the background to it. This submission there was a submission which is referred to, was considered by the Chief Executive, and quite simply, Alan highlighted earlier some figures from the core strategy, which are significant here. The core strategy is obviously adopted. Quite simply, we do not have capacity numbers within the core strategy to facilitate any further housing in this location, and indeed generally it's a point I must make, which it refers to the 4 locations that it is written into the Chief Executive's report within a number of submissions that residential development is generally curtailed in this area. There is sufficient land zoned for what we consider moderate and sustainable growth over the plan period. I think what's key, and all members agree with this through our discussions with them in terms of the provision of catch-up infrastructure and community facilities. The priority for the plan is to facilitate and accommodate existing needs within the communities for community and any infrastructure requirements at this time. New residential population is constrained in this area, and the map shows you on the left-hand side there how close we are to Drogheda. Drogheda is a regional growth centre. That is where the majority of growth is expected to go, and what the key for these communities is infill and keeping within the existing urban form, the existing urban development boundary. So I referred to it earlier about the 4 settlements in the local area plan. The priority going forward for this local area plan, East Meath, is to ensure that there are sufficient community facilities provided during the plan period, and any infrastructure brought forward to allow the movement of people sustainably between each settlement and to control sprawl, which is one of the issues. So bottom line, and the recommendation of the manager, is no change, and there are no core strategy numbers available in Mornington at this time. There is, Alan did refer to it in his overview, just to the east of that area, there is a development, there is an area of new residential proposed, which will be coming to, Alan is highlighting it there, in a number of, there's notice of motion on it, so we'll be discussing it later. That's the only area of new residential proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Cahirla. Just a comment, I suppose, and a couple of questions for the planners again. Why are we continuing to allow the continuous sprawl of Drogheda into East Meath and allowing the sprawl of that whole Culp area into Donnacarney? Many people living in that area and in South Drogheda consider the local schools to be the Railton Amara schools there in Donnacarney, the 2 primary schools. They're demanding footpaths and cycle lanes from Grangerath and from South Drogheda out to those schools, and yet we consider them separate developments or separate settlements. Again, I'd also like to point to the fact that we've had a number of schools sanctioned also in the Culp area. The new secondary school, the Educate Together, not in the right location in my opinion. It should have been closer to Donnacarney so that kids could walk and cycle to school, and the Gael Skull, but that ship has sailed and they're now being developed. Longer term, and I totally understand, I fully agree that we need to catch up desperately with the provision of infrastructure and community facilities in this area. But, you know, we are going to have to look at the next 5, 10, 15 years and, you know, children growing up, needing a home in their local local area, and also needing to populate those very large schools that are now being built. I do think that we need to reconsider the whole Drogheda Regional Growth Centre as whether or not we're going to allow it to continue to sprawl into East Meath, or whether or not we're finally going to put a marker in the line there and say, look, we need to focus on East Meath now and its population. I may need to come back in if that's okay when I have another think or two. If that's okay. Thanks. That's just a question.
Thank you, Councillor. Maybe we get a response.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I don't think it's Drogheda sprawling into Donnacarney. It's the other way around. The reality is, if we look to our parent documents of the NPF, but particularly the RSCS, in Meath we have one centre entitled a Regional Growth Centre. That is Drogheda. It is the view of all departments and national bodies that any new significant growth will happen in Drogheda. Drogheda, as we all know, is split into two, part of which is in County Louth and part in County Meath. There is a joint urban plan which has to be agreed between both authorities, and indeed work, as we know and have discussed, is ongoing on the transportation study that will feed into that joint urban area plan. The future growth of Drogheda will be constrained within the confines of that joint urban plan when agreed. And we have discussed Drogheda at length in this process, and many of the issues pertaining to its future growth were outlined there. But the future agreed plan will be that joint urban plan. And I think the line at which you see on the map at Culp will remain for quite some time, and I am fairly clear that that will remain the development limit for a number of development plans into the future. You will not see any significant or any development, I would add, beyond that line eastwards towards Donnacarney. We've just outlined the map there, so it's very, very clear that the future growth from a national regional perspective is earmarked for Drogheda, South Drogheda. And that line will remain the hard development limit of Drogheda going forward for many, many plans to come, because there is significant capacity within southern Drogheda for large urban development that will be coupled with investment, and with investment comes money from national bodies. The government departments will not be putting significant investment into infrastructure outside these areas, and I think that's an important point. And this is joined up planning, joined up thinking, so I think that's important to highlight here. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Tolan, do you want to come back in? Is your hand up?
Sorry, I had left it up. You know, being a resident here, Padraig, and listening to the day-to-day issues of people, would suggest otherwise. I mean, certainly the Mill Road there that you've outlined in South Drogheda would consider themselves part of the Donnacarney Mornington settlement. It infuriates me sometimes to look at, and I totally understand that, you know, it is a regional growth centre, Drogheda, and I respect that. However, as you outlined, it does straddle both county boundaries, and we've allowed a population there in South Drogheda continue to consider East Meath as their location for schools, for facilities, for community use. When an application comes in from a developer in relation to housing, they must include the school capacity locally, and yet, you know, we're continuously closhing hincha there in Bettystown, which, by the way, is straddled with Laytown's Scoil over Nath primary school. So there's another coalescence. You know, the children from Grange Rath consider that to be their local secondary school. We need to define in this county development plan exactly what we're doing with East Meath, who we are, and identify that. There is a coalescence, it exists already there. We can't apply for town and village renewal, as I said already, as separate settlements. Urban regeneration are for large towns, which we still consider ourselves to be, and according to the CSO as well, we are, and yet we can't access that funding either.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Yeah, frustrated.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do is we will go back to Councillor Smith, and then we'll go to a vote. Councillor Smith.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Pádraig, and thanks, Sharon, Councillor Sharon Tolan. Just to ask, Pádraig, I understand that there's the core strategy, and if you put one in, you take one out. There isn't much to replace it with, but along the coast, the lands that are zoned, are there lands zoned in flood areas? Do we have a map of those areas, the flood map?
I suppose, Councillor, we can only discuss the parcel land under the notice of motion.
Well, it's the East Coast. It's all along the East Coast. It's you know, if lands are zoned on floodlands, surely they shouldn't be zoned for residential, and it won't deliver houses. Whereas this site is not in flood zones, and it's a developer who will deliver houses.
So, Pádraig, if you just want to come back on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, there are flood maps which feed into the zoning process. I will highlight the flood risk assessment is essentially a two-step process. Under the development plan guidelines from the department, we are obliged to obviously look at key criteria in order to inform zoning of land. We have on numerous occasions referred to those 7 key points within our consideration of what they are. And I think it's under point 5, physical suitability, that flood risk is one of the key considerations. So then under the flood risk guidelines, the section 28 guidelines from the department, there's 2 key steps as I see it in terms of looking at land. The first step is the one which we are now undergoing in this process, which is looking at the identification of land for zoning. And just to summarize, the second part is essentially when the land is zoned and then somebody puts in a planning application on that land, if there remains any residual or potential flood risk or something that has emerged post the adoption of the development plan, a specific site flood risk assessment will be required. And that's because at development plan stage, we carry out a flood risk assessment that is a higher, more strategic assessment. But when you get down to a planning application, you're looking at a specific point within that area. Therefore, that's why you require a specific flood risk assessment. So at this stage of the plan process, we've obviously used particularly the CFRAM's mapping exercise, which was the catchment flood risk assessment management system that existed throughout the country. So all local authorities have to look at potential flood risk. And you also look at historical flooding, and then obviously climate change is another major issue. And indeed here we're dealing with coastal flooding. So all of that has informed the maps which has been presented to you from the executive. And indeed, these are, we consider this whilst assessing submissions and notices of motion. I am conscious, Councillor Smith, that through review of submissions and the notices of motion, that there are a number of motions coming up later on, which refer to potential flooding. We can state that at this point, we have utilised all maps, all data, all information we have regarding flooding, and to the best of our knowledge at this time, the lands identified are either not at risk at flooding, and if they are, they'll be subject to further detailed flood risk assessment at the development management stage. But it is important to point out that we do take flood risk very seriously at the zoning of land stage. And obviously, it's not a black and white issue. There are many pockets of land where you may point out where there was flooding in the past. There's not now. You have flood defence works that are in place that will protect certain areas. So, but all those are considered and factored into our assessment. So I assure you that all lands identified all new lands, I should say, we certainly don't zone lands where there is a potential flood risk or where data is telling us. And indeed, we must factor in climate change into that, which obviously does require a precautionary principle that if there's a potential flood risk, then we have to be aware of that. Our flood mapping tells us that there are many areas, existing residential areas, commercial, town centres, potentially at risk in East Meath, but that exists, those are populated and those are there, or planning permissions may have been granted and not been developed at this time. We can't take away what's already there is a key point. But I think we must take flood risk seriously and do, and I hope that informs you from the questions raised.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Smith, you're happy with that response?
Yes, thanks, Padraig. But just one other thing. If there's all these tests that have to be done for a development to actually deliver houses, and the tests, they don't pass tests or whatever, and that means that we're not given the number of houses that's needed. Whereas this site wouldn't need a flood assessment and it's ready to be developed on immediately for much needed houses. So if in along the coast that there is all these, you know, is there A2 or A1, whichever they are, zoned at the moment, you know, close to a flood risk where they would have to do a test before any further development would happen? And if so, could that be replaced? Could this be the one in, the one out? And I wouldn't know which lands would be in a flood zone, so I couldn't suggest which one to replace. Thank you.
Padraig, you might just come in on that.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Smith. To the best of my knowledge and all the information that we have before us, there are no lands proposed for new zoning, and I call them virgin lands, that are at risk from flooding. So in answer to your question, I can't advise you what particular land you would take out to facilitate these lands. That would be entirely a decision for yourself. But I think you have the correct approach that if these lands, which are our significant portion of lands, were to be included, you're going to have to take a significant portion from elsewhere. And that will be a decision for the members and not for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Tolan.
Just a quick question, if you could bring back up the map, please, if it would be possible, Alan. Previously, we had an area that was to be part to the right there, part of a master plan. That has since changed in the draft from being a master plan area to A2 new residential. I'm just, obviously that has had an impact. When it was a part of our master plan, it didn't impact our core strategy. Am I right in saying that? And why are we not looking at a master plan for that whole area now? Because we badly need to deliver more community infrastructure into that area also.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Behan.
Thanks, Cahirlock. Yeah, look, I seconded this motion, but just want to clarify, are we looking at an amendment to that motion now if Councillor Smith and Keoghan are talking about removing lands or dezoning lands to have this zoned? I seconded because I would like to see that development finished and see the housing allocated there. Good development, and I believe there is a need for more housing there. But maybe if we could just clarify, are we amending that motion to dezone lands?
Just indirect, before we go back to Padraig with Sharon or Councillor Tolan's question, with regards to this notice of motion, we're taking in isolation. If there is proposed lands, those lands must be identified and submitted formally as well as with a map. So there's quite a, it's not just a matter of identifying new lands now and then amending the motion to exchange those lands out. This is the work that really needs to have been done in order for us to understand what it is we're being asked to agree with or disagree with. So at this time, it's my understanding that if there was to be new lands submitted or an amendment made to this motion, that those maps, as per every other notice of motion that we would have submitted, and we were quite clear over the last number of weeks, that they must be submitted and be accompanied by maps and reasonings. So that's just on that particular point. If I'm not correct on that point, I absolutely can be corrected. But at this, from an operational point of view, or a way in which the meeting has been run and the standing orders that we've been applying, and we've been trying to be as consistent as we can, remember at all times, that maps must be submitted and reasonings must be submitted for changing the designation of zoning. So in this instance, at this time, we're discussing purely this notice of motion. Padraig, if you want to respond to Councillor Tolan's question, and then I'll go back to Councillor Smith.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just so we're quite clear here, what members are asking. Members are suggesting here, as I understand it, that the area to the left there, the lands which are the subject of the notice of motion, are talking potentially about taking some quantum of lands that was within that sort of master plan boundary. The first point I'll make is
that's not what I proposed. I just asked a question.
Okay.
Yes,
no.
just a question as to why, because on the draft plan it was for a master plan, and now it's zoned A2 residential following a submission. So that was just a question. I'm not proposing dezoning it. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's fine. Regarding your question on the master plan, that master plan was linked to a star objective that was on that. If you recall, I referred in Kells to a whiteland and star objective that existed at 3 locations: Mornington, Kells, and Ashburn. When it was reflected upon and considered within the Chief Executive's report, this was not considered a legal process, whereby future land use on these lands is to be agreed as part of a master plan. That is not true and not correct, and was not found to be legal. So therefore, master plan boundary is removed and that spot objective removed. The change that essentially happened in the Chief Executive's report through recommendations is that the Glenbowen estate, which is now well advanced and nearing completion, well, it is well advanced, I'll put it that way, because the houses are under construction, the site is under construction, and a significant amount of houses are in there. That was considered existing residential, which meant it didn't form part of the A2 core strategy figures. The allocation that was remaining on that land, which was the more northern portion, and Alan's pointing out that was then added to the area which is outlined in green blue there. I would point out that if we refer to the Donnacarney statement under section 4.5, that these lands, it is anticipated that up to 30 social housing units could be delivered on these lands, in addition to playing fields and associated facilities. I must point out that a notice of motion coming after also refers to this and refers to community facilities. The vision for this piece of land is to deliver circa 30 social units plus community facilities on that new A2 zoning. That was the subject of that. So there are plans, there are community facilities going to be provided, and indeed social housing, which many members have referred to and identified the need for, and indeed our housing department has highlighted that there is a need for social units on these lands and can be delivered. So I would suggest strongly against any removal of the A2 zoning on these lands, given the concrete proposals that are envisaged and actually listed within section 4.5 of the written statement for Donnacarney. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. So we're going to go back to Councillor Smith, and then we're going to go with a discussion with a vote. So Councillor Smith, just for final words. Councillor, you're on mute.
Sorry, I keep breaking up as well.
If you switch off the video, sorry, Councillor Smith, if you switch off your video, and just have audio, it should increase the bandwidth that you have. And this. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not asking for, I wouldn't ask for lands to be these here where there's no flood zone. I may go to a vote if Pádraig or the planners wouldn't mind putting up the map of the entirety of the coastal area where there is flood risks. You know, the flood map, I'm not sure what it's called.
Well, Councillor, are you going to propose that you're going to apply new lands to this? Like, if you could explain the thinking behind what it is you're doing, because can
it go to a vote now, or do I have to find lands?
No, well, we can only vote on the notice of motion that you have here.
Well, that's good. Yeah, okay, that's great. Okay, I would ask the members to please support the motion. Thank you. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you very much. So, what we're going to be asking the question is if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation. As with all the questions that have been put to you, it'll be an agreement or not an agreement. So based on Councillor Smith's motion and then the response from the Chief Executive, we're going to move to a vote.
Carla, I thought a site had to be identified, though. I thought we couldn't vote on something that's going to change the core strategy. Can we vote on something that's going to change the core strategy?
We're not. The question is going to be: are you in agreement with the Chief Executive's response? The Chief Executive's response indicates no change. If you don't agree with the Chief Executive's response, then indicate that you don't agree with that. And by doing so, you're agreeing with Councillor Keoghan or Councillor Smith. Are we quite clear on that? No. Okay. Anybody not clear on what we're going to vote on? Okay. So the question in a moment, we're going to go to a roll call vote. Councillor Tobin?
May I just ask if Councillor Smith could maybe amend the motion or correct the motion if she could?
Again, this is the discussion.
Just quickly, and she's
Councillor, sorry, Councillor.
The map she's looking for is C-Prams.
Councillor, what we've done is an opportunity to, if she's looking to amend the motion with associated maps, we have gone over this a number of times over the last number of weeks about the nature of zoning land and the necessity to provide maps. And we've been consistent about that. As you have adhered to that as best you can, have adhered to that, as have we all. If there's land that Councillor Keoghan identifies identifies as land that she wishes to, her motion wishes to include, provided with maps. So other than that, we're going to put the question as we're moving to Councillor Tolan.
I do think you, with all due respect, Councillor Smith is a very new councillor, and perhaps she could be afforded the time to go off and collate. You allowed other members who are long-standing members of the local authority.
But again,
I do understand.
Councillor Smith had said that she's happy to move to a vote. Is that correct, Councillor?
Okay.
Yeah. So again, I am taking all these considerations together. So there's nothing in isolation. And please, I'd appreciate if I wasn't portrayed as if I was trying to do one thing or another. I asked Councillor Smith if she was happy to move to a vote. I'm trying to be consistent at all times, and I've. So, Councillor Smith,
then you are. My apologies.
Okay. So we're going to go to a vote. The question will be if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's response. So if you are not in agreement with the or if you are in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change, please indicate now. Or we're going to go to roll call. Sorry, roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
We can't hear you, Robert.
Here, I have an indication of about 24 or 25 members in the room at the moment, so I'm just going to call each of you in alphabetical order. Councillor Adanuga. Councillor Adanuga, I'm marking as absent. Councillor Behan.
Disagree.
Councillor Bonner. Councillor Bonner, if you care.
I support the Chief Executives.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bray. Is Councillor Bray still at the meeting.
Thanks, Pete.
I'm marking Councillor Bray. I'm marking Councillor Bray as absent. Councillor Cassidy. I'm marking Councillor Cassidy as absent. Councillor Dean.
Disagree.
Councillor Dempsey.
Agree.
Councillor Drew is absent. Councillor Fennessy is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald is absent. Councillor Fitzsimons. Marking Councillor Fitzsimons as absent. Councillor Fox.
Agree.
Councillor French.
Agree.
Councillor Gallagher. Councillor Gallagher.
Agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Gary Smith is absent. Councillor Gilroy.
Agree.
Councillor Golden is absent. Councillor Harding. Councillor Harding still present. I'm marking Councillor Harding as absent. Councillor Jamal. Councillor Jamal. Councillor Jamal is absent. Councillor Keoghan.
Agree.
Could you repeat that, please?
Disagree.
Thank you. Councillor Killian is not present for the vote. Councillor Laws is absent. Councillor McCabe.
Disagree.
Councillor McGuinty.
Agree.
Could you repeat that, Councillor?
Agree.
Agreed. Thank you. Councillor McKee.
Disagree.
Councillor Meath.
Agree.
Agree. Thank you. Councillor Moore is not present. Councillor Murphy.
Agree.
Councillor O'Connor.
Agree.
Councillor O'Neill is not present. Councillor O'Reilly is not present. Councillor Sarah Riley.
Agree.
Councillor Tommy Riley. Councillor Tommy Riley is not present. Councillor Smith.
Disagree.
Thank you. Councillor Sewin.
Agree.
Councillor Tobin.
Agree.
Councillor Tobin.
Disagree.
Could you repeat that, please?
Disagree.
Thank you. Councillor Tolan.
Disagree.
Councillor Toole.
Agree.
And Councillor Tormey is not present for the vote. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 14 in agreement, 8 disagreement, 2 people absent by virtue of conflict, and the remainder absent. So we move on now to notice of motion 134. In the name of Councillor Tolan, if we have a seconder for that motion, please.
Yes, Cahirlock, I'll second that.
Councillor Behan. Councillor Tolan.
Thank you, Cahirlock. This is motion 134, yeah?
134, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So you have a change recommended. Are you happy with that?
Yes, yeah, very happy with that. It's the ideal location for some tourism.
So we wait for the.
Do you want me to?
Just 1 second. We just asked the 2 gentlemen to come back in. Sorry for the, if you want to speak briefly on it, Councillor?
Yeah, well, look, it's an ideal site. It was previously a golf driving range. It's been disused because, well, the soil is too sandy, and the golf balls are getting stuck. So it's all already partially developed there. So it really needs to be something finished off. It's quite unsightly at the moment, and there are great plans for it. Certainly we badly need, and we've identified with Boyne Valley Tourism as well, and in our economic development plan, that we need to attract a bit more tourism into the area. It's right along the River Boyne there with a nice buffer zone around it, and it's outside, I suppose, the area, the residential area, so it's far enough outside the residential area, but still close enough for any visitors to be able to get on their bike or walk to the nearest shop or the beach, or indeed some bird watching along the River Boyne. It's a fabulous site, and I would welcome the support of all of my colleagues, and I want to thank the Chief Executive for agreeing to the change. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for Councillor Killian and Councillor Tormey, who have joined us again, we've moved on to 134. Moved on to the motion 134. So it was proposed by Councillor Tolan and seconded by Councillor Behan. Councillor Behan. Just unmute yourself, please, Councillor.
Sorry, thank you, Ciarán. Just to concur with everything Councillor Tolan has said, I think it's a very good motion and ideally placed, and very beneficial for the area. So again, just would encourage all the members to support. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we'll do is we will, if you could take down your hand, Councillor Behan. So we'll show of hands if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation for a change. If you could indicate that now, please. Councillors, if you could just lower your hands, please. Councillor Killian. If you could just lower your hand, please. Thank you. And if you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, if you could indicate that now, please. Thank you. So that's 16 in agreement and nobody not in agreement. So we move on to notice of motion 135. Councillor Tolan, if we could have a second for that motion, please. If we could have a second for that motion, please.
Yes, Ciarán, I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor.
I have an amendment to that motion from the floor that I sent in. So do you want to take that instead?
So if you just the notice of motion.
I thought, like all the other settlements, you would have been going to the motions from the floor first before.
No, we have consistently gone to the book first and then gone to the notice of motions from the floor. We have consistently done that. A number of times that question has been asked, and we've gone to the minutes a number of times to confirm this. We've always gone to the book first and then to the notice of motions from the floor.
Okay, well, there's an amendment there.
Okay, that's no problem. So we'll pull that up as well. Thank you.
And I think there are two other motions from two other councillors in relation to the site too.
Absolutely. So
sorry, Ciarán, I do have a motion very similar to.
Yeah. So what I was going to do is going to ask the other members if first of all, if they accept that the notice of motions are essentially the same notice of motion, and if they are the same sort of notice of motion, or if they're linked in any way, that we'll take them. We can discuss them together. So that was my next question. Is that okay? So my next question. So the next question is, I noticed there are two notice of motions there that are related to Councillor Tolan's amended notice of motion. They're in the name of Councillor Thomas Behan and Councillor, I think, Stephen McKee. Is that correct?
Yes, thanks for pointing that out, Ciarán.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Councillor McKee, as per what I just said there, are you happy enough to proceed?
Yeah, I am, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So Councillor Tolan, if you want to speak on your motion that's amended.
My goodness, somebody muted me. Yes, please, Caherla. I suppose the amendment, that the main amendment really is in relation to the backfield to zone F1 open space rather than the G1 community use. It is part of a flood zone, although there is a buffer and a bund there at the backfield. So I'm looking to have that front site, which is essentially an infill site. It's, you know, it certainly agrees with an infill site directly adjacent to homes on the east, the west and south of this particular site. It's right across the road from a very large housing development also. I don't believe it would be appropriate to develop that site for tourism in the middle of a residential area, and that A2 zoning would ensure a consolidation of housing. The size of the site would have no impact on the overall quantum of land zoned for new residential, as the density considered in the draft plan would ensure that it's less than a hectare. So you're talking about the guts of 25 houses possibly there. The adjoining site of Riverside Gifts, which is Site C, should remain as D1 tourism to facilitate the ongoing development of their existing gift shop and cafe. The site identified by B for F1 open space, we have agreement for community use. I would be pushing strongly for our local Scouts Club to finally get a home, and also would be identified as the perfect location for a car park for hopefully our Boyne Greenway, which will badly be needed as well in the area. So it would deliver a lot for the community, while also ensuring that we fill in that infill site. Essentially, it's a field in the middle of houses, small, very small field in the middle and across the road from houses. And it won't have an impact, I don't believe, on the core strategy because it's such a small site. So I would ask my fellow councillors to support me on this, and I hope possibly the Chief Executive will support me on this and zone that. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, just for housekeeping purposes, we're agreeing that we're going to take once a clarification from the planning section that these are indeed these three motions are identical, and we're talking about the identical pieces of land. Then we'll come back to get a formal proposer and seconder to accept the combined amendments to 135 as the motion we're talking about. So we go to planning now just for clarification. First, that these are identical pieces of land, the three motions. The three amendments to the to 135 are indeed the same parcels of land we're talking about first.
Yes, thank you, Caherla. I can confirm that note as a motion 135 in the Chief Executive report is the same as note as a motion 4, 5 and 7 from the floor. That's from Councillor Tolan, Behan and Councillor McKee.
Thank you, Alan. And now what we'll do is we need the agreement that we're going to merge those three notices of motions and discuss them as an amendment to 135. So we have a proposer in Councillor Tolan. We have a seconder to that.
Yes,
Councillor Behan. Okay, and now we go to the Chief Executive for the response.
Thank you, Caherla. Just to give some background, I suppose, to these lands, they were subject to submission number MHC530, which did request an A2 zoning on the portion of lands that are identified on the map there. As per the draft plan, these lands were unzoned. They were identified as rural area. And as per submission number 30, the lands I'm identifying there at number A were requested to be zoned A2, while the rear portion was requested to be zoned H1 high amenity. The site area of the site outlined as A, which is requested to go to an A2 zoning, is 1.4 hectares. And this would result in a potential yield of 41 units. As part of the motion, no lands have been proposed to be changed or relocated to this location. So as part of the motion, there is no proposal to take lands out and install them here. And for a yield of 41 units, that would be required. The Chief Executive's recommendation remains no change recommended. It's the Executive's view that a tourism zoning is appropriate at this location. The site marked C has an existing gift shop, and a cafe on site, and it's considered that the zoning of site A and B and the previous notice of motion, which was just accepted by the members, 134, which refer to the lands further to the north, would be all complementary tourism uses. As well as that, the Boyne Greenway is proposed to come along the frontage of this site, so we would see it as a beneficial wider tourism zoning at this location, which could cater for tourism accommodation, bike shop, water compatible uses, water tourism uses and such. There is a broad range of uses permitted under the tourism zoning, and it's important to note as well that the tourism zoning does permit community facility uses and playing pitches as well as that. So community facilities are permitted under D1 tourism zoning as well, which is important to note. So the recommendation of the Chief Executive is no change recommended. It's considered there is a sufficient quantum of residential zoning within the settlements, the majority of which are centrally located within Bettystown, adjoining the town centre and existing services and facilities. A wider tourism zoning at this location is considered appropriate, having regard to the proximity to the beach, the Boyne Greenway, which will be coming from Drogheda to Mornington, and eventually that will join up with the greenway proposed from Navan as well. So a wider tourism zoning is considered appropriate at this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Cahirlock. Yeah, I would also ask the members for their support on this motion. There's three of us from the municipal district that are in agreement that this is the way it should be zoned. It is an infill site, as Councillor Tolan has pointed out. I don't think it would yield anywhere near 41 houses, knowing the site. But obviously that's a matter for the planners and the planning application to go in. I believe the zoning that we have would be very beneficial to the area. We have asked for the backside to be zoned F1, which would be a great asset to the community, and would have.
What's the cost of that? What's the cost of it?
Sorry, Councillor Gallagher, if you could mute yourself before we get that very, very sensitive information. Thank you.
Probably asking the cost of the site, but yeah, no, it'd be fantastic. There's parking facilities with us. There's there'll be community facilities where we might disagree where that would go, but it would be a fantastic amenity to the community, and I think we'll all agree that there is a lack of community facilities in terms of playing pitches or open space for our clubs and societies. So again, I would ask the members for their support on this motion. Thank you.
Councillor McKee.
Apologies, thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I've submitted a motion on this. I'd like to see, I'd like to see some of it used for recreation purposes, much needed recreation purposes for the area. The site in total, I understand, is approximately 6.6 acres, and we're looking at basically two plots there, A and B, of about approximately just over 3 acres each. So look, I think there's good opportunity there for it to be used, you know, for recreation purposes, possibly a car park there for the Boyne Greenway. And I think the proposal is for certainly a modest amount of housing, needed housing in the area. My understanding that there'll only be maybe up to about 30 houses or so that could possibly fit on that site. But look, that would be up to Meath County Council's planning section to decide upon that. But I think it's important that we identify lands in this area that's suitable for particularly for recreation purposes. There's a serious lack of community infrastructure in East Meath. I also think there's a good opportunity there on the parcel of land side C is certainly to support Riverside, the local cafe and the craft shop there in terms of their development, a very important local business. And I think it's important for us to be seen to be supporting them and particularly supporting their growth, which is what they want to do on that site. So I would ask the members to support my motion and support this rezoning for recreational and for residential zoning on this small site. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So we go back to Councillor Tolan and then we'll go to a vote.
Thanks a million, Caherlock. I think it's important to point out, and I know that the uses for tourism, some of them have been pointed out, but also, you know, a possible caravan park is also another possible use. It's totally inappropriate use on that site, so close in proximity to residential areas. I think it's important to take a look at the map there, and as you can see on that side of the road, the density of housing is very, very low. It's nowhere near the 25 to 35 hectare, which we have in other areas and certainly across the road. And I'm quite sure that any planning application would reflect the type of housing that is on that side of the road. So again, I certainly wouldn't support 41 units, nor would I envisage to see 41 units. But as my colleagues have said, it would be down to the planners to make that decision. But I do think that it would be an important site to ensure that it is an infill site, that we finish off the bit of residential there and support the F1 open space for some community use for the future. Thanks a million, and please support us. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So we're going to move to a roll call vote now in a second. So the question to be asked is if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, which is that of no change recommended to any of the notice of motions or from the floor, which are amendments to notice of motion 135. And if you're in agreement with that, you indicate your agreement by saying agree. If you are not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation and by association you are supporting the notice of motion as amended, please indicate that by disagree. Is everybody clear on that? Is anybody not clear on that? Okay, thank you. I'll hand you over to Robert.
Thank you, Caherlock. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Good. Thank you. Councillor Adanuga. Is Councillor Adanuga present? Okay, I'm marking her as absent. Councillor Behan.
Disagree.
Councillor Bonner.
Agree.
Councillor Bray. I'm marking Councillor Bray as absent. Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Cassidy. I'm marking Councillor Cassidy as absent. Councillor Dean. Councillor Dean is absent.
Councillor Dean, you're there.
Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Dempsey. Is Councillor Dempsey still present? I don't see Councillor. I'm marking Councillor Dempsey as absent. Councillor Drew is absent. Councillor Fennessy is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald is absent. Councillor Fitzsimons. Councillor Fitzsimons is absent. Councillor Fox.
I disagree.
Councillor French.
Disagree.
Councillor Gallagher.
Agree.
Councillor Garrity Smith is absent. Councillor Gilroy.
Disagree.
Councillor Golden. Councillor Golden is absent. Councillor Harding.
My apologies. I have to abstain because I was called away, and so it would be wrong not to abstain.
Okay,
Sorry,
you're abstaining. Okay. Councillor Jamal. Councillor Jamal is not present. Councillor Keoghan.
Disagree.
Councillor Killian.
Disagree.
Councillor Laws is not present. Councillor McCabe.
Disagree.
Councillor McGinty.
Disagree.
Councillor McKee.
Disagree.
Councillor Mead.
Disagree.
Councillor Moore is not present. Councillor Murphy.
Disagree.
Councillor O'Connor.
Disagree.
Councillor O'Neill is not present. Councillor O'Reilly is not present. Councillor Sarah O'Reilly.
Disagree.
Disagree. Sorry, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Disagree. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarah Riley, you're disagreeing, yes? Councillor Tommy Riley is not present. Councillor Smith. Is Councillor Smith still with us?
Disagree.
Okay, I'm marking you as disagreeing. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sewin.
Yeah.
Is Councillor Sewin? She's currently not present, so I'm marking her absent. Councillor Tobin.
Disagree.
Councillor Tobin.
Disagree.
Councillor Tolan.
Disagree.
Councillor Toole.
Disagree.
And Councillor Tormey.
Disagree.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's a 3 in agreement, 20 not in agreement or in disagreement, 16 absent and 1 abstention. So the motion carries and all of the subsequent amendments. Right, which is 1. Okay, so notice the motion 136 in the name of Councillor Sharon Tolan. If you get a seconder for that, please. Jackie?
Cahirlock, I suppose, just to clarify on the last motions that were taken and passed, just again to confirm that the Alan and the executive, we did look for land out in that case, you know, the principle of it, but I know the members chose to proceed without doing that. So it's just to note that for fairness, I suppose, and accuracy going forward.
Thank you. A seconder for that motion? Councillor O'Rourke?
Yeah, yes, Cahirlock, just going back to Jackie's observation. We must remember we have the overall statutory restriction whereby we have to comply with the national and regional guidelines and with our core strategy. And as we have discussed before, that does lead to the situation if lands are coming in, some other lands are going out. And that was very clearly established in, I think, in the Kells settlement, where that principle was fully followed by the Kells municipal members. There is the potential, as your planners have pointed out, for submissions from the planning regulator in relation to motions which don't adhere to that statutory restriction. And it's something that will have to be very clearly addressed when we come to dealing with material alterations, which will be the final decision on any land usage. But I would reiterate the advices that have been given previously about the need to adhere to our core strategy and to national and regional guidelines, and reiterate that if there's new lands coming in, some lands need to go out, and there has to be a consideration of what lands need to go out with an appropriate map and a discussion as to why one site is more appropriate than the other or whatever. I hope that just clarifies things going forward. Thanks.
Councillor Tobin.
I was trying to second my friend and colleague's motion there, Councillor Sharon Tolan.
Okay, thank you. So 136, Councillor Tolan.
Thanks a million, Cahirlock, and I'm particularly au fait with this particular site because it is it's actually around the corner from my own housing estate, and it is an absolute scourge on the local community for antisocial behaviour, illegal dumping. They drag all sorts into it. I think, you know, many years ago there was a fantastic dive centre, and it went by the by. The existing site there is now a A2 new residential, although there has been a planning application already granted on it, and then the site adjacent to it, I don't know whether you want to pull up the map, it's less than, it's 0.29 of a hectare, and I just want to, I suppose, rectify the site so that it is residential, and that they can just finish off that small area. The rest of it is a wooded area, and will remain that way. And I thank the chief executive for agreeing with me. It's a very small section that needs to be just rectified, so it's simple enough. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Councillor. We move to a show of agreement or disagreement. So on that, it's pretty straightforward, I think. So in 1 second, you'll be asked to indicate if you're in agreement with the chief executive's recommendation to accept the change. So if you could indicate your agreement with that, please indicate it now by raising your hand. If you could lower your hands, please, councillors.
17, sorry, 17.
And if you're not in agreement with the chief executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. So that is 17 in agreement to the chief executive's recommendation and nobody in disagreement. We move on to notice of motion 137 in the name of Councillor Paddy Mead. If we have a seconder for that, please. Councillor Alan Tobin. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahirla. And my motion here seeks to get more E2 general enterprise and employment into the area. Note that Laytown, Bettystown, Mornington, whether you class it as 3 towns or you class it as 1, it's an area with an awful lot of houses and very few jobs. And in the executive's response that they point out proximity to Drogheda and the proximity to Dublin. But personally, I do not feel that's good enough. I think if this was any other town, I think if when we discussed Ashbourne or we discussed in Shockland, if we said there's enough jobs in Dublin, you can go to Dublin, that would not have been acceptable. And I don't think it should be acceptable on the East Coast. In previous development plans, we zoned an awful lot of area out there for residential, and it is my belief we did not zone enough for enterprise, for job creation and as such. As a result, every day, the majority of the working force in that area goes out very tight roads through Julianstown to Dublin, or gets on the train and the bus service. And that's why the train and bus service is so busy in that area. And so there's a lot of merit behind this motion. And so I stand by it 100%. However, I do note that there is motions coming in from the floor on similar grounds, which I will be backing. And on the basis of them, I'm happy to withdraw this motion because the motions coming in from the floor are probably more specific. And so I'm happy to withdraw this motion. But the sentiment of it, I stand behind very strongly. Thank you.
So because that was a formally proposed and seconded motion, we have anyone not in agreement with the withdrawal of Councillor Paddy Mead's motion? Thank you. We move on to notice of motion 138. Councillor Paddy Mead. We have a seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Gillian Toole. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahirla. Again, this is what I consider to be a very good motion. We have to be very conscious that Laytown, Bettystown, Mornington area is at a very low level. Think back to 2006, the areas in the area that were flooded. Think of the devastation that was caused, think of the property that was destroyed. And now I ask councillors, and some of you would have been to recent AILG training courses with planning, where recent global warming was discussed and the impacts of that. Think about, I ask councillors to think into the future, unless you are on the side of things that don't believe in global warming, the sea level will rise. This motion is very simple. It asks that all land, be it A1 and A2, on lands under 5 metres of mean sea level along the Meath coast be unzoned. To me, that is a very logical thing to do. It's not extreme, it's logical. And I do say it's not permanently, it's until adequate flood defences were installed. Being that if flood defences adequately were installed, you wouldn't need to unzone. But I think back to Bettystown, I think to housing estates in recent years that were flooded, and I note that when Bettystown and the new development came in behind it, and it got some publicity at the time, and it was covered in national and local media, and the council made the response that at the time that land was zoned, the council was opposed to it, but the councillors, this is our reserve function, went again then at the time, and we zoned land that later flooded. Well, not us personally as councillors, but councillors at the time. I don't want to see that happening again. I feel deeply about this. Sadly, however, I've discussed this with a number of councillors prior to today's meeting. I don't have support from my own political group on this motion, and for them very reasons, I will be withdrawing this motion. Very disappointing. Thank you. And I'm saving the council the time of the voting and such, because I realise there's no support.
Okay, councillor, just for clarification, you're withdrawing the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, and just, I know that a number of members have indicated they wish to speak, but there was a comprehensive response given while we discussed Councillor Keoghan's notice of motion 133. Padraig has given a strong indication that an assurance that there was no lands that are currently zoned A2 in the flood zone. So we have had quite a discussion on this, thanks to Councillor Keoghan's motion. And the motion has been withdrawn. So is anybody not in agreement with the withdrawing of the motion? Councillor Smith? Oh, Councillor Tolan, do you?
No, I was just going to support that.
Sorry, Councillor? Councillor Smith? We lost you there prematurely.
No, I just had my hand up. I was going to support Paddy's motion, but he's withdrawn it.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. And Councillor Tolan, are you objecting to the withdrawal of the motion?
I just wanted to clarify a point.
The motion has been withdrawn, though.
I know, but a statement was made, and I'd just like to clarify it.
Okay.
Just to clarify that there was no support because it included A1, which is already houses built. And from somebody who has stood in my wellies around in Northlands, and finally the OPW have completed those works, I'm very, very concerned about flood risk zones, absolutely. But A1, pardon the pun, that ship has sailed. They're already built, and we're now picking up the pieces or mopping up the estates, as it were. As far as I'm aware, I would fully have supported the removal of all A2 residential in flood risk zones. But again, there are extant planning permissions already on those. So it was on that basis that, I can't support dezoning a house that's already built. Thank you.
Okay, and just before we, the motion has been withdrawn, and clarification has been given around A1 and the categorisation of A1 houses. You can't be knocking houses down. And if Padraig could just come in and reassure us as per his statement.
Sorry, can I clarify just quickly?
But you have withdrawn the motion, Councillor.
Yeah, oh yes, but the reason A1 isn't included, obviously it's silly to say you'd be knocking down houses, but where existing houses are, a new planning application could go in. Let's say if someone owned 2 or 3 existing houses, they could apply for a planning permission for an apartment block or so on that site. And
we have received assurance from the planning department under 133 that there is no outstanding lands. Is that correct, Padraig? Could you assure the chamber of that? If there's subsequent, if there's subsequent discussion around this, we have already had a discussion about this as well under Councillor Keogan's motion.
Thank you, Chair. I will just confirm and reiterate the comments and statements I made earlier, and I would go further and state that the summary provided just by Councillor Tolan regarding A1 and committed planning permissions is true fact, and there, as she adequately says, the ship has sailed and we have to deal with everything thereafter. So I can confirm that on the A2 new zoned lands in terms of virgin lands, which I call greenfield sites that have no planning permission or otherwise, on the basis of the information presented to us and provided, there are no flood risk on such new lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, could I ask, there's a couple of motions coming up that are very similar to this.
Yep.
Can we get the C-frame maps so people can see the extent of the flooding and where we're talking about?
Okay, when we get to those notices of motions, absolutely all the relevant maps will become up. Councillor, that motion has been withdrawn. You could lower your hand, please, Councillor. Thank you. So we are going to notice of motion 139. Councillor Paddy Mead, have we a seconder for that? We seconder for that, please, Councillor Toole. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahir. And in ways, it is a similar motion, and I'll just clarify. I'm recommending that we on zone A2 and A1, and people who do not know, A1 be it that it's existing residential, but some of these sites include places where houses is already built. Now, on zoning that does not ask people, the council, to knock the houses, to suggest that is laughable. But what could happen in the future is a new development that could go in for planning permission on them sites. We've seen recently in Leek where a public house has been torn down for a planning permission because it's considered to be a flood risk, yet there was already a building there. Now, going back to East Meath, I suppose there would be a similar concern there. But we've had the discussion on the previous motion. I hope this clarity has helped here. Sadly, I gather there would not be majority support for this motion, and so I would formally withdraw it.
Councillor, is there anyone in objection to formally withdrawing that motion? Anyone in disagreement? Okay, thank you. And Councillor, that's formally withdrawn. Thank you, Councillor. Notice of motion 140, Councillor Paddy Mead. Anybody or somebody a second for that, please? Councillor Stephen McKee. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahir. So when writing these motions, I thought the first two would pass quite easily at the time. I thought they were the safe ones. This was the adventurous one. So in the previous motions, what I was trying to indicate was that land that could flood, that might be at mean water level, should be on zone, be it A1 and A2. In this motion, I was taking into account high tide levels and into account global warming, which would lead to a much bigger area being in danger. So with this motion, and again, I would stress that it was not permanently undone until such time as adequate defences will be put in place. This will be into the future with global warming and the likes. On the basis that the other two motions haven't passed, it would be unsensible to pursue with this motion. And for that, I hope that makes sense. And for that reason, I formally now withdraw this motion, but I do note my disappointment because I do think as a county, we need to be looking far into the future and considering the effects of global warming. Thank you. I formally withdraw.
Thank you. Anybody in disagreement with Councillor Mead's request to withdraw his motion? Okay, Councillor Tolan, you want to speak? Or unless you're indicating your disagreement. Sorry, are you indicating your disagreement?
To clarify a point.
But no, but are you indicating your disagreement with the withdrawal of the motion? Okay, that's all right.
Just like to clarify a point.
Okay, that's perfect.
Just in relation to I suppose, and nobody would suggest that removing A1 would suggest knocking down houses, but what it would actually do is have a long-term implication on people selling their homes or moving home. You wouldn't get a mortgage on a house that has been dezoned.
Yeah, because of the flood zone, and the person buying it would like to know if it was a flood zone. So that makes sense.
It's no longer a flood zone if the risk has been mitigated by the developer.
Okay.
Everybody else is frozen apart from us in the building.
And me in the building.
I'm not frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can
I'm
hear you
back.
now.
I'm back. Okay, I'm back.
Are you back on?
So just real quick, if we could go back to the main screen where we can see everybody, and obviously the people who can't hear me will not hear what I'm asking you to do. Could you raise your hand if you can hear me speak, please? If you can't hear me, raise your hand at the hand function. If you can't hear me, then obviously don't.
Sorry, Chair, I lost connection there.
Yeah, so everybody did, Councillor. Everybody did, yeah. Yeah, so we're just going to, just really quickly, we're just going to pause proceeding just to ensure everybody is here.
Just to clarify, I was confirmed.
Yeah, Councillor, yeah, we just have a tech, we're just going to come back to you in 1 second. We're just to make sure that everybody, we do a test. Okay. So is there any Alan Tobin, Councillor Alan Tobin?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you, if you, the request was, if you can hear me, can you raise your hand, please?
I did.
It's not on the screen, Councillor. There it is now. Thank you. Must have just been a little bit of a delay coming in from Ashbourne. So every Councillor McCabe, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Meath.
Yes.
Could you raise your hand, please? Thank you. Councillor McCabe, if you could raise your hand, please. Councillor Tormey, Councillor Damien O'Reilly. Okay, so we have instability in this. Okay. Okay, so we might take this as an opportunity as well, because we've got to the end of the notice of motions in the book. You can take down your hands, please. We have a number of notice of motions from the floor, which we may recommence on Wednesday with. So because we have been here for 3 hours now, it's just about the right time for lunch potentially. We might move. So if that is anybody not in agreement that we would adjourn until next Wednesday?
Could I ask a question, please, of you? How many motions are left for Bettystown? I'm trying to get a time scale. Generally speaking, when we were talking last, we were talking about finishing up on February 6th. Looking at the books today, I don't think that's possible. Even doing it, even working on the Saturday, I think if we worked on the Sunday, we mightn't still get finished. I was just wondering and I'm also very much aware of the planner situation in relation to the huge volume of applications. And when one looks at yesterday's Meath Chronicle, the amount of one-off rural housing, it goes across 3 pages, so it's not going to stop. So where could maybe Sean give us a kind of an overview as to where we are at the present time-wise?
Thank you. Just before we bring in Sean, we'll just go to Councillor Fox.
Yeah, so thanks, Cahill. Just similar question to Councillor Killian. Just as regards, I think we might have to revise the time scale again, because I think I'm correct in saying we were going to sit all day on Friday, and then the Saturday if we didn't finish. Just similar to Councillor Killian's question.
Thank you, Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Cahir. Look, I suppose just to make the point that a number of those motions from the floor have been dealt with because they coincide with motions in the book, that perhaps there's not a whole lot left in Laytown, Bettystown. I'd be happy to hang on if anybody else would be to be dealt with.
Just Councillor, the fear will be because we have experienced some fluctuation in the force, we'll say, just in case it would happen again. We might just, in case there's anybody who drops out at an important time, we might just take this opportunity. We also have a corporate CPG meeting at 2:30 as well today. So if there's an additional 4 notice of motions that need to be addressed from the notice of motions from the floor, so that will take us potentially up till 1:30, maybe even beyond the time. So it's just in order to be fair to people to prepare for the next meeting. There are a number of members who are present here, including Jackie and Robert, and people who are participating also. So just to be fair to people who continue on today's work as well. But I do get your point. But we have 4 notice of motions and the submissions to go through. Maybe we might just go to Jackie to discuss the question around or whoever Jackie appoints to answer that question.
Thanks, Cahir. I initially raised my hand just to say in relation to the timetable and other decisions that members took earlier in the week, but yet to confirm there's 4 motions left from the floor to be dealt with in relation to this area, and then we have the submissions within the book. So it's very difficult, Councillor Killian, to kind of give you a rough guide as to how long that might take, but sometimes we can get through the submissions quick enough. There's one or two been dealt with already, so time-wise it's difficult to know. But 4 motions left from the floor and the submissions, and then we would move on to a tote. And I suppose, Cahir, just the other thing to say is that we had agreed earlier on in the week that this evening would be the closing date for all notice of motions for all of the remaining settlements to be submitted. Just to remind members of that. So this evening, Friday the 29th, will be the last day to accept motions for all of the remaining settlements, with our aim to try and conclude the process of meetings on February the 6th, Saturday. Am I correct, Sean, on the date? Accepting all that what Councillor Killian and Councillor Fox would have said, how, will we get finished next week? I don't really know. We're at
Jackie's frozen again, Cahir, look.
Yeah, I was just going to cop on. People are frozen. Yeah.
It was you were frozen.
I'm frozen. No,
not anymore. Not anymore.
Yeah, so I think because of that, that's the second time that we've had an interruption there now. So
it's wise, Cahir. But I think people are maybe able to hear me. I'm not sure.
No, we weren't.
No,
we weren't. Just froze. No. Totally froze.
Okay, well, you heard nothing.
We heard some about the notice of motions for Friday, for tonight, this evening.
Yeah, that's.
I heard, Jackie, that you were going to give a bonus to all the councillors who took part in the CP discussions.
Well, by the looks of things, we won't be finished this meeting by 2:30 if we don't stop commenting.
No. Look, we'll put an email to members in relation to the fact that this evening was the closing day for the motions and where we get on to next. And we're at the behest then of the members then, whether we have sufficient time. If not, we're just going to have to plan more time, members. Okay. But we will have to stop because, as you rightly said, I need to pull the planners back to deal with the extraordinary volume of planning applications that have to be dealt with.
Okay, thank you. Councillors Harding and O'Reilly, and then we're closing the meeting. So if you could keep it concise, please, councillors, if you can hear us at all. Councillor Damien Riley.
No, so you preempted. I was going to agree with Councillor Tolan and get those 4 motions out of the way, considering the time constraints. But you're closing it down, and I'm fine to accept that.
Yeah, as you can see, we have some technical difficulties. The internet is getting tired, so Councillor Damien Riley.
Thank you, Cahir. No, just saying if we're looking at Saturday week, why not look at tomorrow then to finish Laytown Bettystown?
I think
keep it rolling. Thanks.
That's a little bit short notice, I think, Councillor, to be coming in the morning. Councillor Fox, your hand is still up.
I'm shutting down here.
Okay, thank you.
Before you go, Damien.
No, this is Councillor Tobin. Is this got to do with the meeting?
Yes. Could we put it to a vote? I second what Councillor Damien O'Reilly says. We're all on the 5K limit, and I think that people possibly would be around tomorrow to do the meeting if it was suggested. I mean, I can only walk around Ashburn.
Okay, just Councillor, we'll see if that's something that's possible. There's members of the staff here who have to prepare. There's councillors who would have to make arrangements because it might facilitate. If you want to put it to a vote, we put it to a vote. But I think it is to pursue this issue when there hasn't been particularly strong support for it other than yourself. And if you have nothing to do tomorrow, maybe I don't know what you want to do at that time. It's up to yourself. So it's but if there's a suggestion to put it to the floor, we form. Do members feel? No, I don't think there's a need to do that.
No.
Yeah.
Chair Corey, can I commit? There's just no possible way staff will be available tomorrow. In particular, I know myself, I've my own personal commitments that I cannot get out tomorrow, and I particularly know that the other staff would have childminding arrangements to make. It's just too short a notice at this particular point in time, particularly
We're just going to close down the meeting now. I think the internet is going to close it for us, and so we're going to, Councillor Toole, we're going to close the meeting. If we could just agree to do that.
Could I just get confirmation? It's from a work, the other job that I do, which is partly frontline, that to confirm Saturday the 6th is definitely going ahead, please.
If we're still here, if the meeting's not finished. It's not a target, it's a guideline, remember. So we don't have to be here if it's up to ourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your cooperation today. See you next week. Enjoy the weekend.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks a
million.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks very much.
Bye, Jim Bob. Bye, Mary Ellen.
Bye.